Rolex is a not-for-profit company. No, it's not. And here's why. Rolex is a for-profit company. It's actually called Rolex SA, but it's owned and it's held by a non-profit charitable foundation, which is the Wilsdorf Foundation. So let's talk a little bit about how this works, right? Because I have a lot of comments on my channel, and you know, you guys also understand at this point that this is all very new to me. But people talk to me constantly about how Rolex is a not-for-profit. And I'm like, well, that's kind of not technically 100% accurate. They're actually a profit company. They're owned by a charitable foundation. So Hans Wilsdorf, as you know from earlier videos I've done on the history of Rolex, etc., he created Rolex many, many years ago. He actually created it in England, but that's a different story. But in 1960, he set up a foundation, and he did it for a couple of reasons. Well, at least a couple of reasons that are on paper. Now, the first was, as he says, to secure the future of Rolex for the long time ahead. We'll talk about that and how that kind of works in a second. To actually create a legacy. Basically, a legacy of perpetuity. And that was after his wife died. He didn't have any heirs because he didn't have any children. I think part of it is, you know, and it's not just, I'm sure, distinctly related to men, mind you, but this whole enduring thing about human beings needing to create their own legacy. We talk about it in all sorts of ways. In HR, we talk about it as what's your leadership legacy. You know, it's just, I mean, it's real, it's not bullshit, but it's just kind of like everyone has to have a legacy. And so I read about this and Hans creating this foundation because he wanted a legacy, and it makes me kind of giggle a little bit, because let's face it, he was a rich dude who just basically wanted to live forever. He's done it through the foundation. And how has he done that? Well, because Rolex is 100% owned by a foundation, it cannot be sold, and nor does it have to distribute dividends to outside shareholders. Because of the limited ownership structure of this, because it's a foundation, it's also a foundation, I should add, set up in Switzerland, which has its own unique laws, in particular around taxation. It's not required to actually distribute or share a lot of financial information about the company, which works, I think, significantly in its favor, which is going to be very different to another watch conglomerate that's owned by shareholders. Because as you may know, and it varies country to country, right? But broadly speaking, if you're a shareholder, you're entitled to certain information. So I have shares in banks here in Australia and other entities, and I get my little updates in the mail. I'm like what they call a mum and dad shareholder, because I own, like, you know, 1,000 here or 1,000 there. I'm not an institutional shareholder, which has a greater stake, like percentage wise, in a company, but I'm still entitled to the financials of the company, the annual report. I can vote at annual shareholder meetings, all those types of things. When it's a private company, or in particular a foundation, those don't apply. Foundation is able to reinvest all of the profits back into the company for R&D or whatever, or it can, as it has done, set up a foundation to distribute funds for cultural and charitable work. And I think this is one of the reasons some people really love Rolex, because they're like, they're a charity and they do all this work. Well, I'm like, again, that's not technically correct. The foundation is has a charitable arm in which they invest in a cultural fund and a number of other endeavors. Yes, and I think that's fantastic. But it's not technically correct to say that Rolex is a charity, because it's not. It's a company that has to make a profit that's owned by a foundation, and the foundation has an arm which is a charity. So there's some little distinctions there, and I'm nitpicking because, you know, sometimes I'm exceptionally black and white and don't like the grey, and other days I like the grey. Today it feels like I'm living in the black and the white. Now, in terms of their focus areas in their charity, they actually like to focus on social action, training and education, and culture. Now, one of the things I really loved about the cultural arm, being a filmmaker, is they invest in filmmakers. Hi guys, just saying. They tend to invest, I think, more in directors. That's not really me, but I thought that was pretty exceptional. They even have a mentor program where they put people together with like people like Spike Lee and Martin Scorsese. Like, this is, I guess, the caliber of people you can have as mentors when the profits of Rolex are bankrolling the foundation effectively. I think it's extraordinary too, in the sense, just from a broad point of view, about how Rolex can continue to innovate and create and survive and thrive, because they don't have to worry about outsider interference through different shareholders who have different needs or wants or goals. They can be solely focused on watchmaking and putting watches out and generating profit for their foundation without having to worry about the outside influences of people who might have slightly different agendas, which I'm sure happens like in every corporate, and it would still probably happen in the foundation to an extent, but the reality is it can't be sold. There's all these things in place that really do, God love Hans, I mean, what a genius. He's literally ensured his legacy from now until, well, who knows, probably it's going to outlast us at this point in time. Unless, of course, Rolex just stop making watches, or people stop buying their watches and they're no longer profitable. Well, of course, then the foundation will probably collapse. But that's ridiculous at this point. I don't think I can see that happening in my lifetime, even if I've got, let's call it, another 40 odd years left in me. You know, it's been around a lot longer than I have. It's probably going to continue to be a lot longer than you and I. So from that point of view, yeah, he's a genius for sure. I think it's extraordinary to have done that. But yeah, I mean, happy for you guys to like tell me if I'm nutty here, but I think, yeah, oversimplifying and saying Rolex is a charity, I think is incorrect. Look, if someone who's in Switzerland, who happens to be a corporate lawyer, who deals in trusts and foundations, wants to correct me on that, by all means, please do. I'm happy to learn. But yeah, I mean, I didn't actually know that Rolex was owned by a foundation until I was like, why do people keep telling me that Rolex is a charity? I'll have to look into this. At least I'm inquisitive, right? But yeah, it was quite fascinating to me, because it has to be the only brand, right, that does that, or has that setup. It's very unique. It just adds another layer of interest to the mystique and that brand that is Rolex, right? And again, I mean, the whole Rolex bandwagon for me, I'm so late to this party, guys, and you know that. And so it's quite a joy to learn all of this as I go along. And yeah, reading about it, there's actually, because it's a foundation and they don't have to share much, it was actually hard to get even a little bit of data in my research on this to sort of talk about it for this video, which made it even more mysterious and interesting, I must say. But yeah, Rolex is not a charity. Rolex is its own company that has to make a profit, that's owned by a foundation that is also has charitable interests. That is my thoughts. You share your thoughts below. You let me know what you think. And of course, until next time, have a good one, guys.